The Hockey Romance Misnomer: Why So Many NHL Relationships Fail. There was an unexpected origin for this video. The starting point was actually very light-hearted. I was sick of reading some of the hockey romances that were around. I thought they were terrible, so I decided to write my own as a joke, a fairy tale version to distract myself. The problem was, as the writing progressed, my own research revealed something that was far less whimsical and fun. It ended up being quite sad and tragic, and the fact that real-life hockey relationships seem to fail at an extraordinary rate, and not for the cliched reasons usually circulated in sports culture. The more reading and watching that went into the research, the clearer the patterns appeared. And even though I saw hockey YouTube channels that seemed very confused and perplexed about why these relationships fail, it seemed extremely obvious to me. For me, even blind Freddie can see the pressure points that lead to such frequent relationship breakdowns. So this video isn't about blame or shame. It was about illuminating a system that quietly primes couples for failure before they can recognize the cracks. And it seems to be yet another byproduct of the dark side of hockey culture. And the sad thing for me was that the idea of a long-standing hockey romance in many ways is more fantastical than anything that romance writers could invent here. So as I've mentioned, NHL marriages fail at a very high rate. They're quite similar to many celebrity and elite athlete relationships, but the focus of this video is hockey. Some statistics suggest that over 70% end within a year of retirement, with apparently most divorces initiated by the woman. I'm not sure if that's true. But it is definitely the case that there is a very high failure rate in terms of these relationships. A lot of the narrative blames the women, claiming that they're the gold diggers. But I actually think that the issues lie within the structural, cultural, emotional, and developmental realities that shape these relationships. So the public perception of a sporting romance is one of glamorous wives, perfect children, travel, and financial comfort. Fans tend to treat the lifestyle as aspirational if you look on Instagram. But in reality, I think the couples face pressures that would challenge even the strongest relationships. Players frequently marry young before forming stable identities or emotional maturity, and responsibility, money, pressure, and fame arrive long before emotional readiness does. From a very young age, players are conditioned, I would even say brainwashed, into how to behave, think, relate, and prioritize. Expectations on both sides of these relationships is not always clear, and many things that would be difficult in even a normal relationship are exacerbated or amplified. For hockey relationships, distance isn't just distance, it's actually structural separation. Players are absent for half the year at minimum, sometimes more. When they're home, they may be emotionally drained or unavailable. Their partners become in practice single parents or single during the season. They're homemakers in a life without stability, and the constant in a household built around variables that they didn't necessarily choose. Aside from the fact that the season is very long and the players are on the road for so much, hockey life also involves trades with as little as 24 to 48 hours notice, multiple relocations in a single season. I saw one player talk about being traded 12 times in 1 year. Then they need to make a difficult choice about whether the partner travels with them or whether they're going to have a long distance relationship. And the fact that decisions are driven entirely by performance coaches or GMs rather than family need. Even the strong relationships struggle under this weight. Many couples who do stay together are effectively leading parallel lives. The lives they have apart, the smaller ones they share when their schedules briefly overlap. Without deliberate effort from both sides, the relationship becomes a long-term coexistence rather than a shared daily life. I've watched a few podcasts where the hockey wife claims it as a virtue that her husband leaves everything at the rink or in the room, and he only talks about the bad things with the boys and always puts on a brave or a happy face when they get home. I don't necessarily see this as a virtue because their lives are already very split and separate and compartmentalized because of the schedule, the travel, and the nights apart. If the players are also keeping their emotions in another compartment only to be shared with the boys in the room, then that is just another degree of separation, which exacerbates that they're leading separate lives. I also want to talk about the locker room illusion, because I think that hockey has conditioned young men to misunderstand love, loyalty, and intimacy. Professional hockey players form deep bonds with their teammates. If you listen to their media responses, they're always going on about the boys, the brothers, the bond, the family, the culture. Hockey borrows very heavily from military style dynamics. There is a hierarchy, chain of command, ritual discipline, conformity, total immersion, and restricted emotional expression. There's almost a level of what I would call unofficial brainwashing. The locker room becomes the only place where affection is permitted and vulnerability is accepted. Hugging, crying, and open vulnerability is socially permitted only with teammates after a game or a loss, and it's the only environment where they feel understood and valued, and it's the only constant amid instability and relocations. But what that means is their emotional expression becomes confined to the sport. These beliefs actually probably are sincere, or they feel sincere, because they're the only emotional ecosystem the players know. The first problem is that this does not translate into a healthy adult romantic relationship. Secondly, another tragedy in my view is that the system convinces the players that locker room closeness is the peak of emotional connection, even though it's extremely conditional and proximity based, it's performance dependent, it's structurally temporary, and it's dissolved once the usefulness ends. What does that mean in practice? It means that players are taught to call this love, brotherhood, family, the strongest bond they know as they battle side by side, and yet it dissolves quite quickly once a player is traded, injured, retires, sent to the minors, or if a roster spot comes up for contention. I'm not judging the individuals here, this is actually a structural issue. I have no doubt that there are genuine lifelong friendships and relationships amongst players that remain, but the issue is that these supposed lifelong bonds are for the most part extremely situational. Real lifelong bonds don't vanish when jobs change, but the hockey player's unbreakable bond disappears, or at least changes dramatically when the context changes. I'm not saying every relationship has to be the one where the person's going to come to chemotherapy with you, wipe your butt post hand surgery because you can't do it yourself. I'm not saying that these bonds aren't real, but I'm just saying that they are very conditional. To give you some concrete examples, in hockey, a traded teammate who used to be your best friend instantly becomes an opponent. Even if they stay your friend, they're still someone that you have to go against and potentially hit during a game. Injured teammates are separated from the room. They tend to train alone, they don't travel with the team. They are generally kept apart from the main team while they recover. If your teammate is sent to the minors, they lose access to a lot of things. And I don't know how many relationships and friendships remain in place when that happens. A player who is not performing becomes a problem for the whole team. A retired player fades from contact. This isn't deliberate cruelty, it's actually just systematic. The dynamic changes dramatically. Even if a player gets to stay within the organisation after they leave their career, for instance, they might stay as a coach, a scout, development staff, or management, it's still not the same because this brotherhood is roster based, it's not organisation based. When the players are talking about a family, they're not talking about everyone connected to the club. They're talking about the guys in the room with them who lace up every day, who sweat and suffer alongside them, who have the same schedule and the same hierarchy. Once someone is no longer in that daily grind, even if they work for the team, the emotional contract will change. So former players who become beloved coaches or front office personalities will say that it's not the same once they leave the room because they're around the team, but they're not inside it. They're inside the world, but they're not in the room. Suddenly, these former players who move into staff roles become authority figures, evaluators, disciplinarians, and decision makers. They're no longer equals. The dynamic with the roster becomes professional first, emotional second. And no amount of shared history overrides the fact that a coach decides your ice time, a scout decides your future, a development coach corrects your flaws, a GM can trade you. I saw an interview with a goalie coach who claimed that even though he was a coach now, not a player, that the players still treated him exactly the same as they used to. he's just deluding himself. There is no way they still see him in the same light. Even with alumni, the relationships cannot keep the depth that they had. A retired player will often say they still care about their former teammates, feel affection. They'll stay in touch with a few, feel connected, but the closeness they felt inside the room evaporates. And I would say that the players who are still active probably have much less time for the retired players than the other way around. The bond was based on proximity, shared schedules, identical pressures, identical stakes. Once that daily shared life ends, the mechanism that held the intimacy together disappears. Part of the tragedy of this belief that this is their central relationship is the "we'd do anything for each other" line that you often hear from players. I think the players genuinely believe this, but they'll cite things like, blocking shots for each other, taking hits, fighting, answering the bell. But if you think about it, these are serving the team's success, not individual devotion. They are duties that are tied to a role. They are not expressions of selfless love like supporting a partner through illness or disability. These acts only occur within performance structures. When the role ends, so does the "we'd do anything" dynamic. Again, this reflects institutional design rather than emotional failure. The players genuinely believe this to be true, but if they thought about it more rigorously, they would realize that this "we'd do anything for each other" is kind of like "we'd do anything for the team or to win." It's not really for each other. So this kind of leads to why the players struggle to build romantic relationships. Hockey conditions players to equate affection with team-only contexts, vulnerability with performance settings, loyalty with conditional systems, identity with usefulness, belonging with group validation rather than individual connection. Romantic relationships require emotional openness, reciprocity, consistency, communication outside performance structures, and unconditional belonging. Players are expected to demonstrate emotional maturity that they were never taught. They also need chances to meet people who like them for who they are rather than what they earn or represent. This is already difficult for many ordinary people, and it becomes even tougher for someone who's got significant money, a demanding travel schedule, and emotional development that's often been held back by the system. I know it probably sounds a little bit offensive to talk about this developmental gap, but the more you look into it, the more you see that it probably is an issue. The emotional age and maturity of many hockey players is kind of trapped at a young age. Whether a player is billeted at 15 or plays NCAA until 20, emotional conditioning follows a similar pattern. Identity tied to performance, praise tied to physicality, toughness, and sacrifice. Emotional modeling comes primarily from peers. Consistent adult guidance is rare. Coaches emphasize discipline over emotional literacy. Even for college players who should be a bit more mature, they don't live typical university lives. Instead, they experience regimented pseudo-professional timetables, confinement to athletic circles, academic advisors funneling them into easy majors. So they enter adulthood with elite physical abilities, advanced hockey IQ, and emotional skills that are stuck around the age of 15. This leads to poor communication, conflict avoidance or aggression, lack of self-reflection, and frequently a very transactional approach to relationships. I say this on the basis of a lot of podcasts that I've watched in which very confused hockey players are going, "I don't know why she left me." So for players, the environment includes hero worship, access, adrenaline, entitlement, and limited accountability. Combined with low emotional maturity, high disposable income, and constant temptation, the risks are predictable, especially when the foundation was never built for long-term partnership in the first place. Blaming women and leaning on the gold digger narrative is very convenient. Gold diggers definitely exist, but the transactional dynamics run both ways. If a relationship begins with both people entering for surface level reasons like appearance, lifestyle, image, and validation, if that relationship based on the above later fails, I'm not sure that anyone should be surprised. And also tied to the locker room identity and the band of brothers is the fact that for many hockey players, their identity collapses after retirement. Hockey players retire relatively early, mostly 30. Some rock on a little bit longer, but very few go past 40. I don't think any do, actually. For many of them, once they retire, they lose purpose, routine, grounding, team identity, adrenaline, external validation, and belonging. Many fall into depression, restlessness, substance abuse, irritability, and existential uncertainty. A hockey player's life is very regimented. They're told where to go, when to go, what to eat, when to sleep. Everything is done for them. They lose this purpose after they retire, and their partners will then have to carry the emotional aftermath of a career that's long overshadowed the relationship. So when you go through all of that, the link to the high breakup rate becomes kind of obvious, don't you think? Players are taught that the team comes first, this fragile teammate bond is sacred, emotions belong at the rink. The locker room bond is very real, but it's very conditional and it's limited. It's emotionally devastating to the players when the reality of that bond is revealed. For the romantic partners, during the career of the player, they get money, prestige, leftover emotional capacity, constant relocations and instability, conditional emotional availability. Post retirement, they get reduced money and prestige. They become the only source of unconditional support, a skill set that most players were never taught to reciprocate. They absorb the identity collapse post retirement. They fill the emotional void previously filled by the locker room, and they receive a very depleted version of the player. From a romance writing perspective, all of this, like I said, is blindingly obvious. Because when you're writing a romance, you're looking at things like emotional development, attachment patterns, communication, healthy intimacy. So, therefore, if you look at hockey culture the way it is now, I would say that the reasons for the high rate of relationship failure are glaringly obvious.